Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? I am an author, illustrator, and truck driver in Oklahoma City. Go read my books. Is it possible for two authors, independent of each other and of each other's work, to come up with similar takes on a similar idea? My opinion is yes. And I've got three examples, 6 books in total, to demonstrate this. The first and one of the biggest ones to come about in, I wouldn't say recent years, but in living memory, is the comparison between Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games and a book called Battle Royale by Japanese author Koushun Takami. This comparison was drawn pretty immediately after The Hunger Games was released in 2008. It also drew comparisons to other books like Stephen King's The Running Man. Stephen King heaped a whole bunch of praise on The Hunger Games. It did share some similar elements with that one, namely that it was about a televised game show where competitors fight to the death, although the execution, pun intended, was a little bit different for The Running Man versus The Hunger Games. The worlds were very different. The purpose of the games in question was very different. But when it comes to Battle Royale, there were a lot of similarities. In Battle Royale, there's an imperial fascist government in Japan that practices population subjugation by randomly grabbing kids once a year and throwing them into what is more or less a natural arena, and then poking them with sticks, often metaphorical, until there is one left who is the ultimate champion. It is brutal, it is violent, and I will even throw it out there that it is very senseless, and it more revels in the grotesquerie and the violence than it does try to make a point. The Hunger Games, on the other hand, is about an annual culling of teenagers from across the future remnants of North America, where they are then thrown into an arena and, metaphorically, poked with sticks until they kill each other and there's only one left. Suzanne Collins has been pretty straightforward about what her inspirations were for this series, namely that she was basing it on the Greek legends of Theseus and the Minotaur, as well as a combination of reality TV and the Iraq War. The Hunger Games, taken as a whole, that is to say that you've got to read the trilogy to get what the focus of the complete story is, although each of the stories, each of the books, contains a version of the games. The games themselves almost function as a character in this story. But the point of it is propaganda, and how that propaganda is leveraged against people for power. There are a bunch of other themes and elements to the story, but it is a much more profound work that borders on literary, and it often gets dismissed because it ended up getting shelved amongst the YA stuff. The protagonist is a 16-year-old girl, and it was released at a time when 16-year-old girl books were about either being a girl boss or having a love triangle or more superficial things. There's much more profundity to the Hunger Games, to what it is saying and the point that it is making. While Battle Royale and the Hunger Games certainly overlap with certain of their elements, those authors came to those elements in different ways. A lot of the fans of Battle Royale were upset at the Hunger Games because its release kind of took the wind out of the sails of any possible American adaptation of the book to the screen. There is a Japanese film adapted from the book. I believe the book came out in the late 90s, and there was potentially something in the works. But then Columbine happened, amongst other things, and studios were hesitant to touch the ideas of a story where teenagers shoot each other with high-powered firearms, which is something that happens in Battle Royale. There weren't any firearms in the arena in the Hunger Games. And so it got shelved for a while, and then around the late 2000s, when things might have been cooling off and rumors were abounding that Battle Royale could get that Western adaptation, Hunger Games came along, and the rest is history. Now, I thought that the first movie was good. The second one was almost great, and then after that, it just went downhill as far as the Hunger Games goes. I haven't watched the Battle Royale film. I've seen clips of it. I understand that it is very R-rated and violent. I am not of the type that thinks that that necessarily makes it good. Quite the contrary. I read the book. Yeah, there are some similar elements, but the authors were doing very different things with them, and I think accusations that Suzanne Collins read Battle Royale and ripped it off are going to fall on deaf ears for me. They don't really have any basis. This is a woman who spent 19 years writing for television before she got into publishing this series, and she'd published other novels before. This wasn't her first foray. She's capable of coming up with her own ideas, and she definitely knows the consequences of plagiarism, and if she were going to pick up a book like this, she would know that it has a following, and she would understand that there's not really a sum in doing that. I think this is just a case of two authors separated by an ocean and a language, and we'll even go so far as to say an ideology, writing a similar idea that they cooked up. There's an even more easily diagnosable answer, an even more easily deconstructible formula for two books that were very similar, that were created independent of the knowledge of each other. And that is Dan Wells's I Am Not a Serial Killer and the Dexter books, who, pardon me, but the author's name escapes me. I've never read them. I'm aware of what Dexter is. I've seen a couple of episodes of the show. And these are two books that deal with kind of the same idea. The main character is someone with serial killer tendencies who is naturally curious about the things that serial killers get up to, but also has some semblance of a moral core and doesn't want to do bad things just for the sake of doing the things. In fact, this person wants to do serial killer things, but for a good reason, and so he relegates himself to, well, in the case of John Wayne Cleaver in Dan Wells's book, hunting down other serial killers. And in the case of Dexter, he primarily hunts people who deserve it. It's not just killers, although there are often killers that he goes up against. There are serial struggle snugglers and PDF file document savers, we'll say, if you get the euphemisms that I'm laying down. He kills bad people that escape the system. When Dan Wells was shopping his John Wayne Cleaver novels, I think he was in the publication process with Tor, and he had an agent, and then he heard about Dexter, and he messaged his agent, and he's like, crap, is this going to be a problem? And I think at this point, Dexter was a TV show on HBO, and she said, yeah, don't worry about it. One of the key dissimilarities between I Am Not a Serial Killer and Dexter is that the serial killers John Wayne Cleaver is hunting in Dan's book are supernatural, are paranormal. They're not just regular people who are doing bad things. And he's got to figure out what it is about their supernatural nature that makes them perform in this way, and what he can do to use that against them. So the Dexter stuff is way more grounded. The John Wayne Cleaver stuff is paranormal. It's about monsters and such. And Dan even said in the submission process that he had a lot of editors reply to him saying, I was really into this until about chapter 8, where we found out that the serial killer is also some kind of monster. If you were to take that out and just have it be another serial killer, I'd be interested. And he's like, no, kind of the point of where I'm going with all this is that it has to be him versus monsters. But the deconstruction was, I want to write a serial killer, but I want to write a hero. So what do? You give him this parameter that he only hunts other killers. The last comparison to make is a book called WILDSIDE by Stephen Gould, and another one called Yellowstone. I believe it's called Yellowstone by Dennis E. Taylor. Hang on, I'm actually going to pause this recording and triple check. Ha! It is called Outland, not Yellowstone. It's significant because Yellowstone explodes in this book, and that's what was sticking in my mind. The similarity between these two, and if Stephen Gould's name sounds familiar, he's the guy who wrote Jumper. The movie from 2008 was based on his novel. I did a video on that in the last couple of weeks. But WILDSIDE and Outland are both about some people that, through some contrivance, find a portal through space and time to more or less the Pleistocene epoch, the Ice Age. And They even start to leverage this portal in similar ways for monetary gain. They say, okay, we've got this, it's stable, we can go into a pre-humanity Earth and we can exploit some of its more obvious resources. We even know where there was gold in certain years, so if we just follow the map on the same spot in this other Earth, we can find gold and dig it up. And then they have problems with converting the gold to cash, with laundering it. It gets attention that they don't want. The question is, like, what if you could go to an unspoiled Earth? What would you do? Well, in the 21st century, it seems like the most obvious thing you would do is resource extraction for wealth. What kind of problems would that bring? You need those problems because problems drive a great story. You need conflict. And the most obvious is, whether it's the mob or the IRS or whatever, you would have people breathing down your neck saying, where the heck are you getting all of this gold? There was an additional complication in WILDSIDE because this was a teen book, whereas Outland had college-age characters. In WILDSIDE, they captured a couple of animals that had been extinct on the tame side is what they would call it. And they brought them back saying, like, hey, we brought these animals back. And suddenly the EPA is like, you're not allowed to have endangered or extinct species. So what the heck's going on? And then in the climax, certain government entities and organized groups are rallying around where these people are hiding the portal and trying to gain control of it. They end in different ways, but I just thought it was interesting that these two authors came up with a similar concept and even explored it in a similar way, but it followed a logical process to get there. And then WILDSIDE was a standalone, whereas Outland is the beginning of a series. And I got to the end of it. I thought it was fine. I've enjoyed other books Dennis E. Taylor wrote. I thought this one was fine, and I wasn't all that curious to see where it went from there. But the point is, creative people often follow the same mental processes to come up with an idea, and then once they start applying logical processes to that idea, they'll tread the same ground before ultimately going in a different direction. And it's not uncommon, and it's certainly not impossible for creatives to come up with the same idea and even do the same thing with it a couple of times before they ultimately reach their conclusion. Just think about this the next time you're scrolling through YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever, and you see something funny pop up. Open the comments and see how many times you see a similar reply just stated in a different way. We are more alike than we are different. Our brains often go the same way, and this is especially true in this mimetic culture where we end up getting programmed with the same jokes through social media and through entertainment. Our brains often move in the same direction, and it doesn't surprise me at all that creatives often tend to touch on the same subjects and even develop them in the same way a lot of the time. I would say that this happens far more than we are aware of it, and it just so happens that every once in a while a couple of these different ideas will get published at different times, and avid readers will look at it and say, hey, I've read a book that was very similar to this a long time ago. It was this, it was that, it was the other thing. In summary, the point of all of this is not to ascribe ill intent to the second author who comes along with this idea and say, oh, you read this and ripped it off. You got to do a lot of legwork to prove something like that, and more often than not, it's just two creative minds working in the same direction. Hey, thank you for watching that. Did you know that I'm also an author? You can check the description for a link to my book, Mr. Friday. It's set in a future where Black Friday is militarized and televised, and the best Friday fighters end up getting sponsors and backing, but it just so happens that the very best of them actually wants to take the holiday down. When he's approached by a couple of other like-minded fighters, he jumps at the chance, and it goes haywire from there. This is a short novella, and it's available in ebook format for just 99 cents. Drive safe. See you out there.